Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Advocacy from Afar, 6 Takeaways for Advocacy and Conference Programs During and After COVID-19. I'm Tommy Goodwin from the Project Management Institute, and I have the honor of moderating today's webinar, which features an all-star panel of experts who I will introduce to all of you here in a moment. I'm also the chair of ASAE's Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council, which is pleased to be hosting today's virtual event. For those of you joining us today for the first time, the Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council is the volunteer leadership group for ASAE's community of more than 2,000 government relations and advocacy professionals nationwide. And during these days of COVID-19, the council has been focused on delivering a slate of virtual learning opportunities for the association community, really focused on improving the effectiveness of association advocacy efforts. And of course, this really comes at a time where it's really never been more relevant or urgent for our respective associations and the members we represent to put their best foot forward from an advocacy perspective. So that's why we're glad to have all of you and our panelists here today. So with that said, before we get started, let me take just a quick moment and introduce Maisha Hayden from ASAE, who is going to share a few housekeeping items with us. Maisha?
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate that. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. We're glad to have you on the line. Just a couple of items to quickly go over. If you have any questions today for the panelists, we encourage you to post them into the Q&A section that's located at the lower center of your screen. You'll see a little Q&A icon. Please feel free to post them there and we will address them and then mark them as answered on your end as well, so you can see that we've answered those questions for you. If you have any additional questions after the presentation, feel free to send them my way to be shared with the panelists in addition. And then lastly, we'd just like to inform you all that we are recording today's webinar and we will be sharing them with you all within 24 hours along with the slides. So please stand by and tune into that information following up. Tommy, that's all I have for today. Back over to you.
Thanks, Maisha. So let me go ahead and bring in today's panelists who are going to be talking to us about advocacy from afar. Let me first introduce David Lusk. David is the founder of Key Advocacy, which specializes in developing nationwide grassroots efforts and advanced advocacy programs for associations, nonprofits, and corporations. Since 2010, David has provided customized advocacy training for more than 7,000 association members, nonprofit volunteers, and C-suite executives. Before he founded Key Advocacy, he was at the Society for Human Resource Management, where he launched the SHRM Advocacy Team, which within 3 years was recognized as one of the nation's top key contact advocacy programs. And he later grew the Alzheimer's Association's ambassador and Alzheimer's congressional team systems to work with every member of Congress. I'm also happy to say David is an esteemed member of the ASAE Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council, so welcome, David. We also have Matthew Zablud, who is a founding partner at Beekeeper Group. He previously worked on the e-campaign team at the national headquarters of Bush Cheney's 2004 presidential campaign. And before that was a lawyer and campaign manager in Melbourne, Australia. For the past 15 years, he's worked with advocacy clients to boost stakeholder recruitment and empower their supporters to become high-quality advocacy champions. He has a master's in political management from the George Washington University, where he also worked as an adjunct professor teaching online political strategy. So thank you for being with us here, Matthew. We're also pleased to have Kristin St. John. Kristin is the Deputy Director for National Grassroots Advocacy for the National Association of Community Health Centers. She's responsible for the planning, implementation, and coordination of trainings and communication tools to expand the organization's grassroots advocacy network and increase the impact of health center advocacy nationwide. She brings more than 15 years of experience engaging and mobilizing advocates around healthcare issues at the Arthritis Foundation and the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, as well as having led social media engagement for campaigns with the Children's Hospital Association. So we're glad to have Kristin here today. And last but certainly not least, Bridgid Myers is the founder of the Forward Events Group. It's a group of independent event consultants. She has been in the meetings industry for more than 15 years and has extensive experience in all aspects of event operations and logistics. Experience ranges from working with associations, nonprofits, and for-profit companies, really around all industries and event sizes. She's worked to serve as an expert in industry best practices, and working with organizations to provide consulting services, really in order to streamline the event processes or to recommend functional solutions to clients and users in support of their project's key objectives. So as you can see, we've got quite an esteemed panel here with us today to share their insights on how COVID-19 has disrupted advocacy and conference programs and how we should really be thinking about this pivot to virtual and remote activities. So, David, let me start with you as we kick off this conversation. You and Matthew recently wrote an article on this subject called Advocacy from Afar, and we'll drop a link into the chat feature so everyone can check that out. Tell me a little bit about the background behind the piece and what you saw as you were taking a step back and thinking about some of the changes that COVID-19 has brought about in the advocacy and government relations world.
Sure. Thank you, Tommy. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. While the extent of the disruptions caused by COVID-19 are certainly unique, disruptions to interacting with lawmakers or even interactions among association members aren't unprecedented. While most of our focus today is going to be on advocacy and government affairs, the negative impact of these unexpected disruptions on associations and nonprofits extend well beyond. It isn't just COVID-19 or thinking back to 9/11. In 2003, an association client of mine looked to hold events in major cities or to avoid events in major cities such as DC or New York in the aftermath of 9/11. So they selected Toronto for their 2003 annual meeting, and a significant SARS outbreak in Toronto led to the cancellation of their annual meeting, where much of that organization's budget was derived. So then that organization experienced staff layoffs. Leadership had to delve into their capital endowment. And as we pivot back to disruptions for government relations, something as benign as an overloaded Capitol Hill switchboard, which we witnessed when the resistance movement activated in early 2017, that can interrupt your phone campaign for days or weeks or prevent it from happening altogether. Even ASAE was a victim of a disruption when their 2018 fly-in and leadership meeting were hampered by a heavy late March snowstorm that not only impacted getting into DC, but travelers connecting to Chicago were snowed in the day before. And my time in DC has even included the shooting of 2 Capitol Hill police officers in the late 90s. And that shut down the Capitol complex for several days. And of course, in October of 2001, when anthrax was mailed to offices on Capitol Hill, the House and Senate office buildings were closed until late January of 2002. That last event led to a more widespread adoption of online advocacy, and that was still somewhat in its infancy at the time. But the lessons here are to incorporate a range of tactics into your advocacy strategy, your fly-ins, and other association events to try and provide your organization with an insurance plan. Because tomorrow it's almost guaranteed to bring about some other unexpected obstruction or hindrance to your efforts.
David, that's great. Thank you. Matthew, from your perch, helping associations with their advocacy work at a high level, what has been your perspective of this new world of advocacy as it's unfolded?
Yeah, I think David brings up a good point about going through the history of it. And it made me realize that a lot of what we're looking to do in response to this crisis is really best practices that many organizations had started trying to engage in. So virtual trainings, virtual conferences, connection in if you're doing an in-person fly-in in DC to people who aren't able to make it. And what was happening in the past was there was a pretty big learning curve, and maybe some members felt that they didn't quite have the skills, or they didn't feel comfortable on video. So if you'd like, I don't want to look too much at the silver linings, although it's kind of nice to look at some silver linings in this crazy time. But one of the silver linings is that we're all now experts in Zoom, and we're all comfortable going on video, although I'm sure we're all quite happy if near the end of the day we're no longer on video, so we don't have to keep looking at ourselves and everybody else. But this is something that we can now say to advocates, hey, we're going to do a remote training and we want you to be engaged. And they have an understanding of what that is. That allows us to put those kinds of things into our programs in the way that we're doing today.
Excellent, thank you very much. So with that background in mind, our panelists today, David, Matthew, Kristin, and Bridgid, have come up with 6 key takeaways for advocacy and conference programs for both during COVID-19 and after. And let's start at the beginning with takeaway number 1, which is expand your footprint online. Bridgid, can you get us started talking about this and talk to us about what this means to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tommy. And thank you all for logging in to join us today. I think when I think about expanding your footprint online, to me, this means this is an opportunity to really think outside the box, and possibly take some more risks than what you would have been willing to do at an in-person event. If you're looking for some concrete examples, as Matthew had said, we've all sort of played with doing virtual events in the past. Now it's much more mandatory, if you will. So things to think about. If you want to create a social media kit, some of you may have already been doing that for your in-person events, but now it's more important than ever to make sure that that gets distributed to your members, your sponsors. Ask them to add your event information, your logo, and your email, so in their email signatures, in their professional profiles, on their websites. Work with your partners to have them help you promote your event. If you haven't ever done it before, maybe now's the time to consider targeted ads on social media. The goal is to utilize social media more than you have in the past, create more digital social campaigns to help get your event out there. Again, the goal is to be present as you would have before. Now it's just time to kind of take some risks, think outside the box, and perhaps adjust your delivery method in that.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. Matthew, let me bring you back in here a little bit to talk about expanding your footprint online. What are you seeing?
So it's really interesting, and we saw this pretty quickly in the first couple of weeks. Two of our clients were the National Restaurant Association. Obviously, restaurant workers and businesses were severely impacted. So Discus, which is the Distilled Spirits Council, different purposes, but doing important things. In some ways, National Restaurant Association went back to something that we sometimes forget is valuable. Which is the emails to Hill officers and to lawmakers. You know, that's still a good starting point, and it's become much more effective. I think both Phone to Action, Fiscal Note, and other groups have said they've had higher engagement now than in any other time in their history on pretty much all of their actions. The other thing that we saw for Discus was we had distillers who wanted to make sanitizer, and so that creates two opportunities and two problems. The opportunities there is that they want to be able to show that they're doing it and that, you know, get it out to customers. So looking at maps and showing locations of different distillers and where they were set up. And then the problems is that, you know, they're set up to make whiskey or gin or whatever it is they normally make. They're not making hand sanitizer, so they don't have the packaging, they don't have the materials. And so, you know, we tried to make some resources so that those two things could connect. That's a really good example of expanding that footprint online. In another example for ACRO, which is the Association of Clinical Research Organizations, and they're doing really important work right now because they're sort of helping with all the labs that are going to hopefully come up with the vaccine to get us out of this crisis. You know, they needed an online resource hub, somewhere that they could have a lot of information. COVID response talking points. Other groups are using social media messages or banner ads or anything that they can provide out to their members. And those are fairly easy, quick things that you can put up either on an existing website or to create a microsite.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. Finally, for this one, let me bring Kristin in and introduce her to everyone for a moment. I know you have been working on some of the interesting ideas in this area. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing around expanding your footprint online?
Sure. Thanks, Tommy. Kind of building a little bit on what Matthew was saying, is, you know, to obviously look for different ways that may be creative. So with me and with NAC, I mean, obviously we work with folks that are on the front lines, as they're calling it right now during this pandemic, you know, medical workers. And the problem is that, as we probably all can agree, the avalanche or tsunami, as I refer to it, of email has been insane, and trying to kind of grab people in different ways that they can kind of see what's going on and they know what's happening. So we started, this was a couple of weeks ago, kind of building on what we started last summer. We started doing music lists and playlists on Spotify, focusing on different things, you know, this past summer. And at first we were just doing it. I honestly think my my boss was actually encouraging it because she knows what a music psycho I am and knew that it made me happy to figure out different songs I could focus on National Health Center Week and celebrating health centers. And then we started doing it slowly but surely every couple months. And then all of a sudden in December, people now really have started listening. So that's a good way. And then, you know, also encouraging people and reminding them by, oh yeah, you know, here's a playlist to help you as you send send messages to your members of Congress and elected officials to tell them how important funding for health centers are. We also noticing, like, because of the amount of email that's going out, we started a podcast about a month ago, Advocacy Notes, like 5 minutes. It's on SoundCloud, and folks, every Wednesday morning or midday Wednesday, it's posted, and it's basically our Washington update that is sent out to the health center advocacy folks, as well as the staff of all health centers. It's just giving them a heads up on what's going on, what's happening, especially in the states and state houses and on Capitol Hill, and what to look out for, or encouraging people to sign up to become an advocate, and also, sending messages to their members of Congress or letters and op-eds. So thankfully, we didn't have to wait 3 or 4 months for folks to give us some feedback, and people are really liking this because it's now a chance for them to avoid having to go and search for that email that came out on Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning. It's the podcast is right there.
Awesome, that's great, thank you. All right, before we get to the next takeaway, let me just remind everybody that you can submit questions for our panelists about expanding your online footprint or any of the other takeaways you'll hear today by entering them into the Q&A box on the lower part of your screen. So with that being said, let's go on to takeaway number 2, collect and share stories and testimonials. David, why don't you kick us off here? Why is sharing and collecting stories so important?
2 reasons, actually. First of all, would be to know and understand what assets that you have. Do you have certain stories from advocates that they can expand upon and it fits into a certain situation? So oftentimes groups tend to scramble and only look for these when they need them immediately and something's already happening. So you want to try and prepare ahead of time and understand what you have. Do you even want to look at it from a congressional district by congressional district basis or member to member of Congress? Then the second thing to consider too is not every story or not every testimonial fits in the method in which you're trying to deliver that. And so you have to have attention to what I refer to as the means, the message, and the messenger. So sometimes believability can be at play, and who's actually delivering the message. That messenger needs to be altered, or some messengers are just better at some messages than others. Certain messages, depending on the means that you're trying to use. Is this for a telephone town hall versus a letter to the editor? And sharing that story doesn't always fit in every segment. So it provides you a lot more flexibility and access to that membership or to your stakeholders when you collect this information ahead of time. And then you know best how to deploy and how to use that.
That's really great. Thank you. Kristin, let me bring you back in here. What has your association been doing around collecting stories and testimonials and sharing them out?
Sure, thanks. Kind of also to build on what David was saying as well. I mean, all through the years in the different places that I've worked, finding, collecting, and sharing testimonials has been sometimes like the bane of our existence, because a lot of people like, oh, my story is not that important. So we try to somewhat, or at least I try to kind of have fun and trick people sometimes to share their story. The one thing that right now, my department is not involved with it, but we are celebrating the Year of the Nurse. So we actually have some staff who are purposely dedicated to reach out to nurses at community health centers to help share their story and to promote them in a way that they normally wouldn't be promoted, which is great. And that's actually helping us kind of also cross promote. Like for instance, with our National Health Center Week in August, there's going to be a nurse who's going to be sharing her story that's going to be focused on one of the days that we have, like the topics. We haven't figured out which topic yet, but that nurse will be talking about it as from a nurse's perspective from a health center, and then we will also promote the Year of the Nurse and what that particular department is doing with the stories and stuff like that. And then also, we have tomorrow is our National Day of Action. We're encouraging health centers across the country, staff, CEOs, everybody to contact their member of Congress and kind of push out as to how important or why health centers are important to their community. And part of that, I actually have, which I think is the key to help kind of start the avalanche of collecting personal stories. I've reached out to some key people that are very dynamic and everyone knows them, especially at various conferences and stuff like that, to do a video message as to why their health center is important to them and why they're supporting and why they're getting involved with the National Day of Action. And then also at the end of the video, they're encouraging people also to share their story. So what started as there's a small handful, we've had some videos pop up on social media, also encouraging and telling people as well. So it's been fun.
Excellent. Bridgid, let me come back to you. What does best practice look like from your perspective when it comes to collecting and sharing stories and testimonials?
Sure. From my perspective, I think it's important to have an understanding of how you want to collect these testimonials and how you want to use them. Back to what David was saying with the method and the messenger, if you're targeting new members, new advocates, new attendees, maybe the testimonial from somebody who is a seasoned veteran might not hit the nail on the head quite as much as somebody who just attended for the first time last year, where they have a very different perspective than somebody who's been doing this for several years. You can also make sure that you switch up the delivery methods. Don't be afraid to ask prompting questions. If you know how you want to use this testimonial, ask for it in a way that they will give you what you need in order to use. Don't be afraid to, like Kristin said, use the video messages. If somebody writes a great written testimonial, make sure to use that. If somebody is better at photographs and they want to do a collage, use that. Different people resonate with different types of messaging, so make sure that you utilize all of it, the videos, the visual, the written, and that can help expand your audience and target it towards the audience in which you want to make sure that you're hitting.
Excellent, thank you. Matthew, round us out. Anything else you'd like to add here?
Yeah, first of all, I thought the comments from the other panelists are spot on. And we're seeing people really wanting to get engaged and wanting to share their stories. It's funny, when we first saw everybody getting on Zoom, our natural inclination was to say, okay, let's get these recordings, get people to send in a video from Zoom. We've actually going to give a little bit of different advice here. We're finding that the quality is coming up so much better on a mobile phone, on an iPhone or an Android device, and the audio. It's really important when you're getting people to produce a video that they get that audio as strong as they can. There's other advantages to using the phone. If they've got a family member who can film them, they don't have to have the sort of up the nose shot that you get with the laptop. We can have a little bit more variety. And then they can also do a selfie stick or something else to get it a little higher quality. then get them to send that in, and you can edit it, or you can go out to other groups to edit it. It doesn't need to be perfect. I think a lot of people are worried that they have to have, you know, the exact right testimonial and everything has to be said exactly that way because that's what you have to put online. But I'd encourage you to put some of them together, to cut them up the way you want, mix in other stories. You can still very easily mix in B-roll if you have it, or photos, that kind of thing. I'd strongly encourage it.
Excellent. Great insights there from everybody. Thank you all. Let's go on to the next takeaway. And to me, this one seems absolutely critical. Takeaway number 3, train and engage your virtual ambassadors. David, do you want to start us off here again?
Sure, absolutely. You want to try and do what I refer to as extending the enterprise, especially in times where we can't get to see a lawmaker face to face. There's only so many hours in the day our staff can have. How can we actually extend the reach of the organization? And that's by finding volunteers. And we typically know, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen of our best volunteers for the organization. But let's find individuals that we can leverage as regional leaders, and prepare them to be able to handle different tactics beyond just e-advocacy. Those who can make phone calls, those who are best at handling video chats, back to the means, message, and messenger. There could be a comfort level or just a natural skill set in different advocates, some who are better public speakers than others who may be better writers. But most of the time, our supporters and our members don't do something because they're not comfortable with a tactic. So one of my clients, American Library Association, we're building a key contact program, a national network of volunteers for them. One of the things we're currently doing is reaching out to each of these volunteers and conducting one-on-one interviews. Now, it's a pilot program, so we don't have that many to call, but we're trying to not focus our materials on what we think they need, but we're going right to our audience to make certain that we're customizing what it is that they need to be a better public speaker, better advocate, whatever, to represent libraries most fully. So.
Oh, that's great. Matthew, let me turn back to you for your perspective on training and engaging virtual ambassadors.
So it's funny, we've been running virtual ambassador programs for years, largely because it's too hard to get all of your people all across the country into one spot every time that you need to engage with them. So that's been a fairly normal best practice. And there's a lot of groups that have been doing the training online, either through learning management systems or just providing webinars, that kind of thing in the past. So again, not particularly new. We are definitely seeing an uptick in the number of groups that are trying to do trainings. I would encourage you, if you only can do a webinar, that's all that's available to you, provide that kind of content. If you can do something a little bit more like training modules, that are blocked into 10 or 15 minutes, and maybe have an interactive element, quizzes, some type of minor gamification, you'll find that people will get much more involved. And give them a certificate or give them some recognition at the end of completing it. The other thing that I would say that's really important right now, the people, your members out there actually want to do stuff for you. I think some of us are afraid of asking people to get involved. We know they've got a lot going on. They're at home, there's different stresses. But the one common thing that we have seen is that the members really want to get engaged right now, and they want to be doing something on behalf of their industry, on behalf of the country if they can, if it's that kind of an important issue. So ask them, get them to take the trainings, get them involved in something like a virtual ambassador program. You'll be surprised at how many people say yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew and David. So we are up to takeaway number 4. But before we get there, I just want to remind everybody that you can submit your questions and comments for our panelists by typing them into the Q&A box on the lower part of your screen, and we will get to those at the end of our time together today. Without further ado, let's go to takeaway number 4, which is foster remote networking. Kristin, how should associations be thinking about fostering virtual networking opportunities these days?
I'll be honest, I'm like okay, how can we have fun with this type of person? So a lot of times, we have Zoom, you have all this stuff at your fingertips. And also, I don't know if anyone's heard of or used NoddlePod. We actually have that as well. Think of it as a boring Facebook, but for within your company or your association. Right now, just to kind of, as I focus on Zoom, right now we're trying to encourage folks to do letters to the editors and op-eds across the country. And a lot of times people will be like, oh, this is too hard, I don't know where to start. And, it's always good to have everyone come together, but you don't want to make it necessarily too business-like. So I've actually started scheduling kind of like a sip and write type of networking event where we're encouraging people to come on Zoom and be like a happy hour. Obviously not alcohol sip, but we're having fun with the title. But basically inviting them on. If they decide to come, I'm going to be providing them with like a skeleton letter to the editor or op-ed, and basically kind of have it as almost groupthink as everyone starts talking and sharing ideas as they write it, so that my goal is by, say, the end of the hour or half an hour, depending on what the final schedule is, folks will have a flushed out or will be on their way to a flushed out LTE or op-ed, so that then offline, kind of making it one-on-one, then I can work with, or my team and I can work with the folks that are involved to help get the stuff placed. Obviously with newspapers right now, everyone's talking about the pandemic, and it's kind of getting hard to get stuff printed, but at least get, encouraging them to, okay, this is done, your op-ed's not accepted, we'll at least get it on medium.com or get it on LinkedIn, so that so other eyes see it and it can get passed around. Another thing that we're doing, we actually have what we call ACE health centers. They're the Advocacy Center of Excellence. And we've started doing monthly affiliate calls to reconnect as a group. And our team, my team, gives them updates, shares information, especially what's going on in the Hill during that week, what's coming up. And then we kind of step back and let folks actually talk, ask questions amongst themselves, share best practices. And the feedback that I'm getting, previously we've never done that, but the feedback I'm getting is that folks are really happy about that, because a lot of ideas that they're hearing is stuff that they can actually adapt for their health center to get stuff done as well.
Interesting. Kristin, what was the name of that networking tool again?
NoddlePod. It's a NODDLE and then pod, POD. I kept calling it NoodlePod for the longest time until I was like, no.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Bridgid, let me turn to you again. I would imagine that fostering remote opportunities to network is pretty critical in a world that craves connection these days. What are you seeing here in your experience?
More from the event side, I think it's important to remember sponsors, exhibitors, they're no longer spending money on travel and lodging like they would if they were at an in-person event. They also haven't participated in that many events this year, so they're also craving some networking, some meeting new people and getting some leads. Some of these sponsors have been asked to reallocate their budget dollars, but that doesn't mean that we should be afraid to ask for them. Many are looking for a way to spend their money. I also think that this is a way that you can get creative and do the things maybe that you would hesitate a little bit to do. People want to help you. People are craving human interaction at this point. So it's important to capitalize on that. If you're doing, for example, if you're doing a webinar, make sure that you're asking polling questions, utilizing the Q&A or the raise your hand tool. Have them participate in giveaways. If you're doing like a full virtual event, I've seen people do like a scavenger hunt sort of throughout the event, or a bingo card, where then people can enter to win a giveaway. You can send out any of the swag bags that you would have on site, or t-shirts or that sort of thing. Send those out to your attendees who have registered in advance. Ask them to promote it. It's also a way to expand your presence online. If you're doing happy hours, everyone loves a happy hour. You can also just have everybody get in a room and chat. You could break it up into smaller rooms, maybe by topic or that type of thing, so that it's not quite as intimidating. You can also ask a sponsor to help you with a cocktail making class and send out ingredients ahead of time, that sort of thing. I think people want to be involved. They want to do something outside of their normal, and there's a lot of ways that you can capitalize on that and use that in this time.
That is excellent. Thank you very much. Actually, while we've got you here on the hot seat, let's go ahead and turn to takeaway number 5 that we have today, which is around seeking member input. Tell us a little bit about that from your perspective.
From my perspective, it's important to remember that everyone wants to feel heard. So this is the time to reach out to your members, your advocates, your sponsors, and seek their input. If it's a matter of what you're doing with your meeting, I have a lot of clients, they're essentially polling their attendees. Can they travel? Will their company allow them to travel? Do they feel safe traveling? Are they willing to participate at all this year? What important things do they want to see if your event goes virtual? This is a good way to sort of let them do some of your work for you, let them help you make some of your decisions. You'll get a good feel for what people are thinking, how they're feeling. They can help you frame your conversations and your decisions based on what you need. Again, make sure that you're reaching out to them. It also helps build some trust a little bit. I will say that there's a caveat to all of this. Be deliberate in who you're reaching out to. If you know that there are some opinions you're not going to listen to anyway, make sure you take that into account, because people want to feel heard, so make sure that you're giving them that opportunity to be heard.
That is excellent advice, Bridgid. Thank you. David, let's bring you back in here. How do you approach the importance of seeking member input with the association clients that you work with?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical to try and understand the membership. Otherwise, I kind of liken it to trying to set a table and put all the silverware down in the dark while you're wearing boxing gloves. You're just guessing at what you're trying to do. And oftentimes we guess wrong. We want to really understand what it is that our members are looking for. Again, back to the American Library Association, one of the biggest things that they saw with their volunteer network was they wanted to get to know one another. They were looking for a way to create community within the community. And we all know one of the rules of thumb in the association space, member dues are just sort of one of the things that keeps an organization running. It's member engagement that's really most important. So if they're engaging with one another, that will lead to them attending other events together. So we had to learn that we had to bring all of those volunteers together rather than just being on a Zoom call once a month if we're covering a training topic or what's our engagement tactic for that month. We're giving them an opportunity to interact with one another on Facebook, a private Facebook group. They can come in, share best practices, share tips. And really when you go to members and seek their input, sometimes you can learn something that you never even thought of. Again, back to the Library Association, I'm plugging them so much today. I sort of consider myself an advocacy expert. And one of my New York advocates with the Library Association told me that she was going to have a meeting with her local legislator. It wasn't actually a member of Congress, it was a state rep. And I sort of asked her, how are you conducting this meeting? Well, she's actually conducting the meeting on the plaza of her library, and they are maintaining a social distance. And I asked you have got to get a photo of that. That is fantastic. Why I didn't think about that is horrible, but kudos to you. And the other thing was that lawmaker videoed the interaction. Obviously, it's an election year. A lawmaker who can go to his constituents or her constituents and say, no matter what, I'm still serving the community. I'm able to be accessible. It was that sort of idea that came from member input rather than the experts just running things. You never know what you can find, and you also never know what talent you may find. I've had other organizations that found a member or an advocate who was a professional photographer. Now, suddenly, when there were community events, they didn't have to go out and spend more money. There was an advocate who was able to take these photos either at community events with the lawmaker, or if the organization had an annual meeting and they brought all their advocates together, here's someone who's sort of helping run that subset, that sub-community within the overall community.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Thank you very much. So we have made it all the way to takeaway number 6. But before we get to that, I want to take a moment first off and thank everyone who submitted a question so far this afternoon. I think we've got quite a few to chat about here in a few moments, but please keep them coming. Just type them into the Q&A box on the lower part of your screen, and we will get to those right after takeaway number 6, which is adopt best practices from others. David, let me come back to you on this one. Talk to us about the importance of leveraging best practices here.
Well, one of the benefits to the association and nonprofit space is how much we information share with one another. That you don't really see that necessarily Nike and Adidas coming together to share best practices and when they're competitors. But within the association space, you have that benefit of the mistakes that our colleagues have already made so that we can avoid that, or sometimes finding an innovation that we did not really think about. And a great example of that is Andy Polk, who is with the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America, who introduced to a number of us in the advocacy space an online tool called remo.co, not .com, that takes you to Remo drumheads, but remo.co is a virtual networking space that actually allows for concurrent conversations at the same time. In essence, imagine virtual tables. You can even have presentations at each separate table. You can have a brainstorming session if it's a round table. You can even have people, you can have a time so that everyone is switching tables or interacting with different attendees. Then you can have an overall speaker who then sort of, as we would at a normal in-person event, sort of everyone hushes up while the primary speaker speaks, whether it's a sponsor of the event, whether they're doing a presentation. So just that ability to learn what else is out there is so vital. And one of the best places to learn, if you are a member of ASAE, is there is a models and samples library that is compiled, and Tommy has led a great effort in trying to boost the government affairs content in there. But there is content for meeting planners and marketing professionals, communications professionals. There's a lot of ideas and standards out there, and we should tap into those who have already helped sort of pave the way to success for us.
Oh, that's excellent, sir. Let me bring Matthew back in here for just a moment, because I know the Beekeeper group obviously works with many associations and other organizations. How do you leverage best practices from across those clients and from others, like David just noted, to improve how your clients are advocating?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we come and listen on these kinds of webinars. ASAE is a tremendous resource. The Public Affairs Council is a tremendous resource. The Congressional Management Foundation and others. We're also looking at some of the different groups. I know Brian Fratkin is on the line, and he was one of the other people who introduced us, David and I, to that Remo tool, which we love for networking. You know, that changed very much the way that I even thought about how we could do a webinar and an event. Just the ability, it had so much more of the normal happy hour elements, where you would sort of jump from table to table, you know, that Zoom didn't quite have in the way we were using it. I think if you have a look as well for metrics, that's the other thing when you're trying to look at best practices. It's great to get lots of ideas, but you want to know if then you're implementing something and you're actually, you know, achieving what it is that you should be at and what level. So I look around for any groups that are putting out metrics, maybe information on, you know, the percentages of email opens or advertising metrics, that kind of thing, to really give me a sense if my programs are running well for clients.
Excellent. Finally, let me bring Bridgid back in here for her thoughts on this topic.
Sure, thanks, Tommy. I think in terms of the event planning side, in the virtual world, we're still trying to figure it out. There's a lot of platforms that have come out, as David had mentioned, the remo.co. There's a lot of them right now, and they all do a lot of things really well. And truthfully, I've yet to find one that can do absolutely everything you want. It's important as you're going into planning a virtual event, really have a good sense of what's important to you and what is maybe a little bit less important. Matthew had talked about analytics. That's huge. That's very important. So make sure if you're looking at platforms that you can figure out which ones can deliver what you need. There's a lot of them out there. We're still sort of waiting for the best ones to kind of rise to the top. There are some resources. I know there's several event planner groups that have put together basically a spreadsheet of platforms they've used, platforms they've heard of, and what they can do, what they can't do. It's a great resource if you can get your hands on it. I think we can put the link in here. There's also steal from what other people are doing. You know, David had mentioned one networking tool that he really likes. Check it out. If you can use somebody else to do the work for you, again, capitalize on that. Take some calculated risks, but know what your main objectives are so that you can go into your event with your eyes wide open.
Excellent, thank you. So there you have it, everybody. 6 great takeaways for advocacy and conference programs during COVID-19 and after from David and Matthew and Kristin and Bridgid. So we've heard from our all-star panel, and now we're going to get to hear from you all. And throughout today's session, we've been collecting the questions that you've been submitting in the chat box, and we're going to turn to those here in just a moment. But before we get started, just a reminder that there is still time to get your questions into our panelists. Just type it into the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can over the next 15 minutes or so. So with that, let's see what's on folks' mind today. First question, how do you address or engage groups of ambassadors that might not have reliable internet access? That's a very interesting question. Anybody on our panel have any thoughts on that one?
I do. First of all, if you can leverage the phone, which is one of the first things to think about. Another plug for one of my clients, the American Library Association. A lot of the libraries and local communities are actually boosting up their internet access and asking people to come to their parking lots and leverage the Wi-Fi, staying in their cars. What other materials can you get to individuals that they can access? So I mean, it is hard to have some type of virtual training without having the internet. But there are other ways. If you can connect ambassadors together in a community, they can talk to one another over the phone. Sometimes you want to have a mentor-mentee program. So that is sort of one of the ways to help those volunteers.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next question. Do you make individual asks for ambassador programs, or do you simply offer the trainings to everyone and then let folks self-identify?
So I might jump in on this one. There's a lot of discussion about what you should do for training in general. I'm a bit of a believer that you kind of want to make some stuff available for everybody that's maybe a lower level, kind of 101. And as it gets more difficult or more intensive, sometimes you want to make it exclusive, almost that people have to go through some steps in order to get to there, so that they're spending the time and engaging with it the way you want, and also so you can make sure that you've got the right kinds of people who are focused on it. It's a slightly different approach, but I think it works well for a lot of organizations who do it that way.
Excellent, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. We've got another one here, and this is a very interesting question from somebody who's with us today from Texas. It appears as many of my local congressional offices are going to start opening for face-to-face meetings again soon, but a bit hesitant to start those yet, and would rather keep things virtual for the time being. I guess the question is, are congressional offices getting tired of these virtual meetings and anxious to go back to face-to-face, or are people still willing to hop on these virtual meetings and calls and the like?
Ooh, I'll take that.
Right.
Sorry. From the feedback that I've been hearing from health centers who are doing virtual meetings, and also from friends and family who work on the Hill, they like these virtual meetings a lot. So I would not necessarily jump in and show up at their offices or do face-to-face. especially if you have the opportunity and the office itself is willing to do virtual, I would just go with the virtual and just save everybody the time and the worries about their health.
And that's a crucial element too, Kristin. An uncomfortable advocate for any reason will not be a confident, competent advocate. And one of my other clients, the National Association of Spine Specialists, we've been running calls with members of Congress each week who were supposed to attend their fly in and speak there. What we're finding is most of these members of Congress are jumping from call to call. And what used to maybe be a limitation of 2 events in an hour, they can now squeeze in anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 if they're careful with their time. So some of these offices do feel that they're spreading themselves more around their community and able to interact with constituents at a much larger pace than they could otherwise.
And also, for folks who are thinking about that of doing virtual, I would recommend definitely doing a practice with the volunteers beforehand, or at least getting some sort of script. Just like if you're walking in being like, okay, you're going to deal with these particular facts, you'll share your personal story, especially if you have more than 2 or 3 people. It'll make things easier, and then but everybody jumping in to talk on a virtual call or even on a phone call, just because you may not see people's that little reflex that you have when you're about to speak, and so everyone will be talking over each other.
Excellent, thank you. And let me ask just a little follow-on question on this from a different attendee, and I guess I'll put this out to anyone who wants to take it, which is kind of following in on the virtual piece. Are folks seeing Zoom fatigue in their experience as everything's moving to digital? I think some folks have heard about it in passing, but for those of you who are with us today, are you seeing it, or is it something that people have just sort of adopted into their new normal and people are just happy to move forward with?
I'll take that one. I think a little bit of both. People are getting a little bit tired with it, but they also realize that this is the world that we live in right now. I would say to combat the Zoom fatigue, have fun. Mix it up as much as you can. See what personal elements can you bring in there that really reflect your association or your organization to make it not your average, ordinary, everyday Zoom meeting. There is some fatigue, but I think people are understanding that this is how we're conducting business right now.
Excellent, thank you. There was another question here that asked for some good online conference platforms, and I don't know, maybe Bridgid, if there were some of those in the lists that you had mentioned earlier that we can send along to folks, get them a list afterwards.
Sure, absolutely. Real quickly, I would say it all depends on your budget, your size, what you're looking for. Some to mention quickly that I've really liked, Communique or Intrado. Those both have a component where it can look like you're in a specific setting. There's a lot of more web-based applications, Open Water, Pathfinder, On24. Those are some good ones. I would start there probably.
Excellent, thank you. I may send these over towards David and Kristin, given their sort of experience in the training realm, but recommend any specific resources for building an ambassador program would be the first question. And a second question, have organizations trained advocates on how to hold virtual meetings? David, maybe start with you on those.
Sure. The first thing regarding resources for building an ambassador program, go to the well. There are a number of organizations that have already built these. What have they done? What were their experiences? Building one from scratch at SHRM, that probably taught me more than what I could ever really try to learn from other organizations. Just doing it myself gave me that insight as to what were the pitfalls we would fall into. And as I'm working with new clients, helping them build those programs out, we're able to accelerate what we're doing and roll those programs out much faster. There are a number of organizations out there, whether it's the Grassroots Professional Network, ASAE, the Public Affairs Council, that they have resources that may be guidelines that they could share on how do you want to start to build out that program. And there are a number of organizations and individuals out there, such as myself, who can be hired to actually help someone build a program. The crucial element is understanding that one size won't fit all. What worked at another organization or their culture may or may not work for your culture. So it's a combination of maybe looking for other resources out there from other organizations who have this, perhaps talking to some of the professionals who help build this, and involving your membership, perhaps, or your audience. Perhaps you want to have an advisory committee that helps steer how you should run and build out this program, which is something that I've incorporated at a number of my different clients.
Excellent. Thank you. Kristin, let me start with you on this one, given your association voice here, and then maybe shift as to some of the others who want to weigh in as well. How have your organization's policy priorities and asks shifted given COVID-19 relief and response efforts? Has it consumed the advocacy efforts, or are you mixing these emerging needs in with some of the original asks and needs prior to COVID-19?
Well, unfortunately, probably with some associations here, we were having issues before COVID-19, and then now, unfortunately, the funding issues that we were dealing with on Capitol Hill has just blown up because of the pandemic. We're pretty much running it on two completely different platforms that are the same, that are bridging across, if that makes sense. So a lot of times it's crazy. There's no other way that I can describe it. It's one of those situations where we have these particular asks, and then we have that are just what's going on funding wise. And then at the same time, with the CARES Act and everything that's going on with the pandemic, it's just adding more complications to it. So everything's not just black and white. It's gray and fuchsia and all kinds of different colors, because everything is pretty much entangled with each other as far as our asks and our concerns and what we have to focus on. And we just have to, and bless my my colleagues in the Fed Affairs department with what they've been dealing with, is just basically heading to the Hill with like, okay, we need to talk about this particular funding, but also remember that just because you've passed the funding that's focused on the pandemic, that doesn't mean that any of this is going to help the funding aspects that we've been focusing on beforehand. So a lot of it is not necessarily pivoting our asks and specifically even with us trying to communicate with the field. It's more of, okay, basically showing them without it being a 5-page debrief paper, trying to break it down and explain to people how there's really 2 asks, and right now we're just focusing on the pandemic ask, but reminding our members of Congress and the public that there's an underlying situation happening at the same time, if that makes sense. It's absolutely crazy.
I don't doubt it for a minute. Thank you. We've got 2 more, and we'll kind of do these in rapid fire session here. Engaging trade association members can be more challenging than engaging members of professional associations. How does one overcome the challenges associated with getting members of trade associations to sign up to be ambassadors? David, Matthew, any insights there?
I'd like to know a little bit more about what their challenges are, but I've been already speaking a little bit. Matthew, why don't you start off on this, since I've been kind of taking the floor a fair amount?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Part of the problem with a professional association, you're represented as an individual. It's kind of easier to make your own decisions. When you're in a trade association, you might be there representing a company or some other kind of organization, and therefore you don't necessarily feel like you have as much ability to go on and be an ambassador. So I think there's really 3 steps. 1, I think you have to explain what an ambassador is. And it doesn't necessarily mean someone who's going out there publicly in a very heavy way. I think there can be very different kinds of ambassadors. You know, there's a difference between a surrogate and an ambassador being a person who has an established and strong connection that they build with their local elected representatives, which they can do in their individual capacity, but then they can sometimes bring that to bear for their industry. I think the other part of it is that, you know, again, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but I am a big believer in the application process and trying to make something feel a bit exclusive, partially because it's a little bit like Greek life or something when you're in college, right? You know, if you can't get in, that's when you really want to do it. So if you can kind of create an incentive for people to get involved and give them something of value once they are involved, that also helps take away some of that problem because it really is so self-selecting.
And another thing too is if there's a challenge for you as a staff member of an organization to reach those, you know, the employees of the various member companies that you have, can you leverage your actively involved members, a small subset, to basically be the ambassadors for the ambassador program, to be the ones who are regionally out there to corral individuals or stir up support for the program, to share their experiences? A lot of times using a member or going with the membership in their own words is what can help win support or interest or drive the growth of a program, rather than the staff of a government affairs department trying to tell people we need to do this because this is in our best interests. Leverage the assets you already have and have members do it for you. But guide them, of course, guide them what they need to say.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. We got one more question before I do. I just want to thank Kristin for giving us a list of some online webinar and learning platforms. I just put that in the chat, so thank you very much for sharing those with us and your experience there. For the last one, I think I'll turn to Bridgid on this one. Question: for the first time, we're holding our annual membership meeting virtually, and we'll be voting in new leadership, honoring outgoing chairman, probably using Zoom, and really focused on trying to combine the new sort of the virtual way of conducting meetings with some of the traditional ways. Any advice or suggestions on how to help bridge that gap?
It's a little bit hard without knowing more information, but I would say now's your opportunity to really get creative. Tradition for tradition's sake, or tradition because it's actually a good tradition, that might be something to consider. But have fun, especially new members honoring old. Think about what would keep you engaged. Again, this is kind of hard to answer without more information. Creativity and fun, the more you can inject your culture, your organization's attitude around it, I think it will be better received.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so with that, it looks like that our time together today is coming to an end. As we wrap up, let me take a moment and thank everyone for joining today, and then a special thank you to David Lusk from Key Advocacy, Matthew Zablud from the Beekeeper Group, Kristin St. John from the National Association of Community Health Centers, and Bridgid Myers from the Forward Events Group for all of their answers and takeaways and insights. It was excellent. Thank you all so very much for participating. Just one reminder, today's webinar is part of an ongoing series of virtual education events from the ASAE Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council. And our next event will be taking place on June 2nd, and it will focus on advocacy, diversity, and inclusion. David Lusk is graciously going to join us again on June 2nd, and he will be accompanied by Stephanie Reeves from the Maryland Psychological Association and Carmen Elliott from the American Physical Therapy Association for a session that's going to be moderated by Danielle Barron from Insightful Concepts, who is also going to be the incoming vice chair of the Advisory Council. And they're going to be talking about the importance of incorporating diversity and inclusion into association advocacy to deliver some truly impactful results. So for more information and to sign up for, I think, what's going to promise to be a really, really important discussion, please take a look at the events section of the ASAE Collaborate online community. And so with that, let me thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. Stay safe, be well. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, everyone.